Hi, my name is Eric Pagli, and welcome to the talk show at the World Water Week in Stockholm. On this talk show, we'll discuss water security solutions in northern Kenya and find out why it takes more than just boreholes to ensure access to water and sustainable wash outcomes in arid and semi-arid lands. And joining me for this talk show, we have Anis Sakrati, Senior Partnership Development Manager at Grundfos Safe Water, James Ogutu, WASH Advisor at Practical Action, and Espen Auken, Professor of Geophysics at Aarhus University. Thank you all for joining us here for this talk session. So Espen, the problem of insufficient knowledge of aquifer systems is not unique to the arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya, where empirical evidence on yield rates and underground water potential is often lacking. What would you say are the main challenges for improving the situation?
That's a good question. I think that there are two challenges. One is on education, and the other one is on deploying technologies in mapping the subsurface, because that's the basic. If we are scouting for water, want to locate a borehole, having knowledge about how the subsurface looks like before we do that ensures a sustainable extraction of water, and also the risk of putting a dry well is much reduced, because we all of a sudden got knowledge of the subsurface. One of the big problems is that the technology we have developed and are using in our part of the world is not necessarily reaching the refugee camps or the host communities or the poor parts of other parts of the world. And that is that gap of getting the technology we actually already have, getting it used and deployed, is a major problem, I think. And then that ties into having we need to create awareness, we need to create capacity among the technicians, among the people actually being in the field, measuring and so on. I mean, that there's an education stretch, and they also need to be made aware that they have to take this new technology and use it. So I'm really advocating we need to deploy and use new technology to know what we are doing before we drill, and by that we can estimate the resource, the size of the resource.
And James, on the topic of technology, can you tell us how the academic and business communities are working to provide low-cost technologies to improve water quality in arid and semi-arid lands?
Yes, thank you, Eric. Yes, looking at technology, and because once you do infrastructural development, then comes with it issues around quality interventions. Because again, if you don't really intervene on that, then there are health implications. So in terms of addressing the water quality, we are looking at a number of low-cost, technological aspects. We are looking at issues around deflouridation, low-cost deflouridation technologies, that then can improve the quality of water. But then it has to begin with water quality tests, because there's the big thing to do, investment in infrastructure. But now, before that, to avoid the health implications that you're talking about, then you really need to look at the water quality test, so that you're very sure of the parameter that you really need to address, the parameter that you really need to address and work on. And then, so we are looking at deflouridation technology, low-cost deflouridation technologies that focusing on communities and schools. Schools in the sense that school can be an entry point to the community, and therefore the communities can be able to access water that's free of fluoride. Again, we are looking at fluoride levels of, in northern part of Kenya, as high as, up to 4.5, going to around 4.8 parts per million. Again, that's high. So, and again, you cannot do so much. The only way is to address that quality. So that's one. Two, we're also looking at issues around desalinization. Again, but again, this can be so much involvement in terms of energy use. But again, you can also opt for those low cost. Three, we're also looking at basically water quality tests that around the household. We can work with the communities to look at how can you address water quality at points of use, because you couldn't do deflouridation, you couldn't do desalination, but again, other than that, there are also those water handling, that goes with it. So you need to look at issues around behavior change communication around point of use water treatment. So combining the three, desalination, deflouridation, and also just basic water quality tests at the household level, focusing on point of use water treatment measures.
Very good. And Anis, from your experience, what are the best approaches for locating groundwater resources in terms of optimizing water point and small-scale water utility management and subsequent water use behavior?
So Grundfos is a technology provider. We produce pumps. And actually we got involved in trying to understand what it is to actually deliver a water service, because we felt that would inform us on how to design our technologies better. And especially for the regions in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia where there is a lack of access to water. The interesting thing about a utility is that it's a split incentive. The operator of the system needs to earn money to be sustainable, to earn a profit if it's a private sector. And at the same time, we want communities to use water. That's the whole point. We want them to be empowered to be able to use water both for health purposes, but also for productivity. And what I think is the challenge there is that, we need to then reduce the waste in the system, because we need to ensure that the systems are used efficiently. So when we're protecting groundwater, we need to remember that the actual objective is almost counter to that objective of protecting the groundwater. So we need to look at the entire system, from the extraction, which I think you've been talking about, to the treatment, which James mentioned, around reverse osmosis. Are we using the right technologies? Because there's a lot of waste in those systems. And then the end use of the water. And for that, we think that prepaid technologies are really important, because they both empower communities to decide how much water they can afford to use if they're paying for it. And it also means that you're not getting the wastage from an open tap that's left running. And it's much more controlled in terms of wastage. And then finally, of course, the management of wastewater, which I think some of our colleagues in Grundfos are quite concerned about, isn't being addressed in that context.
Very good. And development economists, governments, researchers, and academics alike have all stressed that public-private and public-academic partnerships are crucial for achieving effective WASH outcomes at scale. Is this kind of approach something that you all support in general?
Yeah, definitely. I think, for me with a university background, I think capacity building among partners is extremely important. We can have all these fantastic technologies, but if they cannot be received, but also building capacity is also the same as basically you're also building willingness to receive and use these technologies, because you are replacing maybe something which is very old-fashioned, but you're comfortable with. And maybe it's even very low cost to deploy it. And now we have this, now we're putting in with something which is much more expensive, but will also give you much more. So there's a lot about capacity building, at least for me as with a university background.
James, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, absolutely, Eric. If you look at the budget allocation, for instance, for the various governments, recurrent versus development expenditure, lion's share, of the budget goes into recurrent expenditure, and then that leaves them with, paltry amount that goes into development, and therefore that means that governments have to rely, on bold partnerships that they have to create, with private sector players in this, and you see the public-private partnership then brings with it improves, the capacity, the public sector capacity and governance. Something that probably maybe looking at the budget that is allocated for development then may not be enough. Then two, there's the aspect of financing. With that, then it means that the public sector is able to finance a number of infrastructural projects that otherwise they will not be able to do, with the paltry amount that is allocated for development spend. So I agree that it's something that really need to be very keen on, because there are those opportunities that we are able to improve in terms of how we want to achieve our objectives, because that's the only way we can be able to be strategic enough and ensure that we achieve those objectives that you've set, as public sector players. So it's something that's very key and really needs to be embraced, by the public sector. Thank you.
So, I mean, we have practical experience of a public-private partnership, which we're implementing in Ghana. And I think one of the benefits, of course, of the PPP mechanism, as it's called, is that it mobilizes resources to areas where are not necessarily a priority for government because of the financial constraints that governments face. So, and it makes intrinsic a professionalism in the service that's delivered. But I think the key to successful PPPs is also ensuring that the private sector is meeting performance standards. So setting those standards and ensuring that they actually live up to them.
And as a final question, I'd like to hear your thoughts and outlooks for the future. I mean, looking ahead over the next 3 to 5 years, what do you see as the best strategy for improving water security and sustainable wash outcomes in northern Kenya? Denise, perhaps you can continue.
Sure. I think the key word is efficiency. So I know our colleagues at Grundfos are spending a lot of time trying to understand how can we develop technologies that can help with monitoring using digital solutions, and hopefully, integrating this into rural water systems that make it an affordable investment as well. But I think at the end of the day, we need to be thinking in terms of systems and reducing what we call non-revenue water as much as possible in that, so that we can still increase access to water, but without it having a detrimental effect on resources.
James?
Yes, thanks. Yes, looking forward, and for us at Practical Action and with support from Grundfos Foundation, one thing that we've established and we've realized is that, we have insufficient aquifer knowledge that has been already alluded to. And for us, we are looking at, making deliberate efforts to ensure that we really have enough data in terms of the aquifers that we have, so that any development that we want to embark on, is informed by adequate, aquifer information that we have. So deliberate efforts to ensure that we have proper, data mining that takes place, and therefore whoever comes in then can just have more like a repository, of information that we can really look into and begin to make investments. So that's number one. Number two, we're also looking at strengthening the governance of these water schemes, because it's one thing to put all these monies in this, but it's another to ensure that this is sustained in the long term. So working with the various government authorities, ensure that they are linked to the water management schemes that we've supported, in establishing, in training, in ongoing mentorship. So again, looking at how can we really strengthen their capacity in terms of fundraising, proposal development, so that they're able to look for more and more partners and financing in most of their projects. So that for us is very key.
I'll do it very short. I would say create examples of what we actually can do, deploy technology and create capacity. That is extremely important.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for sharing your expertise on how to improve water security and wash outcomes in northern Kenya. So thank you very much for joining us here on this talk show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this episode of the talk show. Stay tuned for more sessions throughout the World Water Week.